Friday practice in Montreal is over and the fastest driver of the day was Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin. But what did we learn? Well, to be completely honest, not a great deal. But even so, I am going to be taking a look and we're going to be having a discussion about Friday practice. If you enjoyed the video, then please hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now, let's get straight into the video. As usual, I'll be talking about the top 5 teams later on, which is Aston Martin, Mercedes, McLaren, Ferrari and Red Bull, so stick around for that. Yes, practice is over on Friday, and we learned, frankly, not a great amount. FP1 was a bit of a washout, where heavy rain limited the amount of running that the drivers could do, which was then limited even further as Zhou Guanyu lost control and hit the wall, bringing out an early red flag. In FP2, the session was set to be dry at the start, but the rain arrived just as soon as the cars hit the track. During this point, we got to see the rain falling, but the cars continued to get faster and faster on the dry tyres as they were building tyre temperature, and also the circuit was actually still drying a little bit, but then of course the rain increased further and the cars had to come back to the pits for a while. You can see that here when you look at the times from FP2 for Fernando Alonso and also Charles Leclerc, so you can see just how things unfolded. These times do mean that we did at least get to learn something. The crossover from Inters to Slicks looks like it could be between the times of a 122 and probably a 125. When they get to this point, you expect to see them in for a set of intermediates or a set of dry tyres if it's going from wet to dry. That is, of course, if the rain continues for the rest of the weekend and into the Grand Prix itself. Out of interest then, let's compare Alonso's fastest lap in dry conditions to the fastest lap he set on the intermediates during FP2. With this you can really see where the differences are, as the circuit grip is much lower, and also the intermediates just don't provide the same amount of grip as a slick compound tyre. Coming out of all of the corners, you can see that on the Inter tyre, Alonso is just having to wait to get back to full power, which consequently leads to him being slower down all of the straights. And also when he's braking, he's having to brake sooner and also be a little bit more gentle on the brakes, which means that the braking distance is extended. And that's because locking up is much easier in wet conditions. You can see, for example, at the turn 3 and turn 4 chicane, in the dry, Alonso has a minimum apex speed of 126 km per hour, but in the wet, it's only 105 km per hour. In the dry, Alonso was also able to reach a top speed of 331 km per hour down the back straight. Now, he did have DRS, which of course helped his top speed. In the wet, when there was no DRS, the top speed was reduced to just 300 km per hour. This comparison really does go to show how much more the drivers have to work in the wet, as the grip is not there, and they just have to wait a little bit more and be a little bit more patient when driving the car. In FP3, the session is set to be a bit drier, so we should see some more representative running before the rain arrives once again for qualifying. I just want to say that if you are enjoying the video so far, then I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now though, let's get back to the video and let's talk about the top 5 teams, starting with Aston Martin. For Aston Martin, in my preview and predictions video, I did say I expect them to be a little bit stronger, but I didn't expect them to be first and third. Maybe they have the secret for being fast around this circuit, or more likely they just timed the fast laps right. Even so, it was a decent day for them, as they did rack up a lot of laps in both conditions. I did expect them to be stronger this weekend, mainly because I think the circuit should suit them with the emphasis on a higher top speed. With tricky conditions expected in qualifying, then I can see Fernando Alonso having a great day and getting himself much higher up the field than we have seen him recently. I can also see Lance Stroll getting into Q3 if it is wet. As much as we slate Stroll, and usually for good reason because he deserves it with how silly he drives sometimes, he does at least pull out something very impressive when it comes to wet qualifying sessions from time to time. So, we could see that yet again. For Mercedes, so far it looks like they are more on it this weekend, as the circuit is one that Lewis Hamilton tends to thrive on, and in FP2, George Russell was at least second fastest. So, a typical weekend for them so far, where they start off looking good before they tend to fall back as the weekend progresses. In the wet, Mercedes looked fairly solid, and they were there in terms of pace when compared to McLaren and Ferrari, so it could be pretty interesting to see how they get on in qualifying. Out of interest now, let's compare the fastest laps of George Russell to Fernando Alonso. And when you look at these two times, you can see that they are fairly similar, but the differences arrive at the braking zones every single time, as Alonso just had the confidence to brake later and extract a little bit more from the car. During this phase, the conditions were getting worse and worse, so driver bravery is what shone through, and that is why Alonso, on the brakes, was able to just gain a little bit more time on George Russell. That being said, Russell did typically get a better exit from the corners. For Mercedes, they will probably be hoping for rain, because if it is wet, then they can get into the mix at the front of the field. If it's dry, then I do fully expect them to be the fourth fastest, as we've seen quite a lot so far this year. For McLaren, today was a much more anonymous day than what we have been used to, as they went out on mediums at the beginning, and they struggled to get temperature into the tyres in the same way that Ferrari had at least managed to do, which led to them being way down the order. In the wetter conditions though, they did look more impressive, as Oscar Piastri was at times the fastest car on track in the intermediate conditions. FP3, I expect we will see a lot more from them, and we will get a much better of understanding of where they are this weekend. As a reminder, McLaren haven't actually scored any points at Montreal since 2014. If qualifying is wet, then I do expect we will see them fighting for pole position, based on what we saw in Shanghai during the sprint qualifying, which was wet of course. For Ferrari, they were very impressive to me in dry conditions at the start of FP2, as Charles Leclerc seemed to be the only driver on the medium tyres who could fire them up and extract any performance. Even so, he was still a long way away from Fernando Alonso on soft tyres, but it does really go to show that in greasy conditions, the soft tyres are much faster than mediums, and even more so than the hard tyres. Let's now compare Charles Leclerc's time to the next fastest driver on the medium tyres, which was his teammate Carlos Sainz. When you look at these two laps, it actually starts off stronger for Carlos Sainz, but then at the exit of the turn 3-4 chicane, Leclerc just gets better traction, and that seems to be the story of the lap. If you look on the exits of pretty much all the corners, Leclerc is faster to full throttle on the exit of the corners, and I have a feeling that's because he has a little bit more temperature in the medium tyres, and that extra temperature in the tyres leads to them producing more grip, and with that comes more traction. In qualifying, they are going to need to make sure that they can fire up the intermediates if they want to fight for pole position, because it does look like, at least for them, it's going to be tougher than it was in Monaco. And finally, for Red Bull, there's not really a great deal to say. Verstappen had a power unit issue, which looks like it will require some changes, which for him is not ideal, as it was a fresh power unit for this weekend. Honda and Red Bull are under a little bit more pressure this year, and it does look like right now that cracks are starting to show, and they are starting to form from the mighty outfit. Sergio Perez is having his usual mid-season dip, and it does look like things are a little bit more tricky for Max Verstappen this year. And I say that, and now they will probably dominate qualifying, and dominate the rest of the weekend, and then dominate the Spanish Grand Prix. But we'll see if that does actually happen. So with that in mind then, what are my qualifying predictions for the Canadian Grand Prix? Well, to be completely honest, this is going to be a little bit more of a shake-up than what we usually see, and to be also honest, I've not really got anything to base any of these predictions off of, so I'm going to have a bit more fun with it than what I usually do, so please don't be too upset if your driver isn't featured in this top 5. Well, I think then for P5, I am going to go for Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin. P4 will be Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. P3 will be Oscar Piastri in the McLaren. P2 will be Max Verstappen in the Red Bull, and Lando Norris will take pole position in the McLaren for the Canadian Grand Prix. But like I said, there's nothing to actually base any of these off. I'm just having a bit of fun with it, so please don't be too upset if your driver's not featured in that. Even so, what are your predictions for the Canadian Grand Prix qualifying? In the comment section down below, let me know. And as always, comment, leave a like, and subscribe for more F1 content. Thank you all so much for watching.